Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Rare Wellness Podcast, the podcast designed to help you heal holistically and give you the tools that you need to thrive. We're making it easy to understand medicine and wellness with practical steps from the experts, one podcast at a time. The only thing that we ask is that if this episode helps you live a little bit more aligned and a little bit better, that you'll leave us a review and you'll share this with a friend. That's all that we ask so that we can continue to provide you with free, valuable knowledge from the experts of well-being. I'm really excited about today's episode because we're going to be talking all about the transformative power of yoga, somatic movement, dance, and yoga has been a really important part of my journey. I actually got certified as a yoga teacher back in 2020. And it was one of the most transformative practices for me. When I started, it was all a physical practice, and it ended up impacting every area of my life, changing my mental health, my confidence, my understanding of the world. So I'm really excited to get into it and interview an expert in this area. Today, we're going to be having an incredible guest on the podcast. Her name is Karla Parbon. She is the movement manager and one of the lead yoga and bar instructors at Rare Wellness. And she is also a doctorate candidate at Gonzaga University, where she's studying how to apply the concept of movement and how movement can be the source of healing and restoration for both the individual and collective, blending art, spirituality, and human experience. She also specializes in somatic movement methods, including the Alexander technique and the Laban Movement and Feldenkrais methods. When Karla isn't at Rare, you'll find her at Gonzaga University as faculty in the theater and dance department, where she's been teaching various styles of dance technique, anatomy and physiology for dancers, and dance on film. Karla has been teaching yoga for many years now and has been with us here at Rare since January of 2023. When she's not busy teaching yoga, bar, or dance, you'll find Karla snuggling with their family pet, Gus, who is a Flemish giant bunny, and spending her time with her husband, Josh, and two college-age boys, Jace and Cade. Karla, I am so excited to talk to you today and learn about these different methods, learn about somatic movement. Also, you have a Flemish bunny. How did I not know this?
Yes, we adopted Gus this fall. So we actually had Brad, who was a mini lot bunny, and he passed away kind of tragically in the fall. So it was a little rough, but then someone reached out, and there were quite a bit of bunnies who were rescued from a meat farm, and they were trying to find homes. And I was like, I need another bunny. So, and we wanted a little bit bigger one because they're not quite as skittish as the smaller ones. So, kind of keeping in tune with our random weird names, we named him Gus. So yeah, he's like the size of a cat pretty much. And yeah, he just kind of hops on the couch and snuggles at night and does his thing. And yeah.
I love this. No, I loved bunnies as a kid, and I had some friends who had some, and I would always beg my parents, and they always said no. So this is amazing, and I would love to meet him sometime.
You'll definitely have to meet Gus. He's a lot of fun.
So cute. Thank you for coming on the podcast today. I'm really excited to chat and learn more.
Thanks for having me.
So, Karla, how did you start with yoga? And let's just start there. How did you start with yoga? How did you start with movement? What has your journey been?
Yeah. I mean, I could go back to way back in the day when, in the start of history, but we won't go that far. But I would say that I got started in movement, specifically dance. One, because I was actually born club foot and my feet were facing upwards. So they were turned in and flipped up, right? So I had some issues with like my hips being really rotated in. And so my parents got me involved in dance just to help with turning out the hips and working on just the kind of the movement mechanics that dance really helps with. And I literally fell in love. So that was like 3 years old when I started dancing.
Which I know, because in dance you have to do so many turned out movements. I'm sure that was kind of hard at first.
It was, yeah. In some ways it came very naturally, and then in other ways it was really hard. So I fully respect classical ballet dancers, but that was very hard for me
Yeah,
because of the rotation of the hips and how your body needed to move. And so I really gravitated more towards the modern and contemporary and
I love that.
jazz styles. So that's really where my specialty lies, is in those various techniques. But um, once I found dance not just as kind of a way to move as a kid and explore different styles and explore who I was, I think it really started to become something that helped me understand myself. As someone who was diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia late in her adulthood, I was in my mid late 30s. Hindsight looking back, movement and the ability to express myself differently was extremely not only healing, but it helped
Yeah.
me kind of sift through all the chaos that was going on. And back in the day when I was growing up, it just wasn't something that they saw in girls, especially. We weren't categorically the typical ADHD kind of person.
No, I've said this so many times before, but we're gonna have to do an entire episode on ADHD and late diagnosis and ADHD in women because you're so right. I think it's such an underdiagnosed, especially in so many females, because sometimes it doesn't show up as that running around the classroom. Like they might
Mhm,
be daydreaming in their heads or like
mhm.
doodling in a notebook. So it makes so much sense too that dance was able to be kind of that therapy. It was for the enjoyment, and then there was also the therapeutic benefits that you were benefiting from
Right,
without even knowing. Like that's
right.
incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's truly where the place where I find movement as this source of healing began. And dancing all through elementary, junior high, high school. I was a typical dancer, burned out kind of thing. And that
Mhm.
story goes on and on. But, I started practicing yoga when I was in college. So this is like late 90s, early 2000s, right? And back then, yoga was in your random gym in a giant aerobic studio. And looking
Fitness.
back, though, it was fitness yoga, right? And knowing that all those teachers were certified, it was just a different environment compared to kind of what I'm specializing and growing into now. And then as I progressed through my various educations, I grew up underneath what was called the Royal Academy of Dance, and that's a European form of training. And so lots of rigor that happened, and that put my body through a lot. And as someone who was born with kind of these funky hip issues, I think one, it helped, and two, it also is something that I'm not paying for now, but recognizing that I'm having to repattern things even as someone in
Yeah.
her mid 40s.
Yeah.
And that's really where yoga came in 10 plus years ago, where as you age and as someone who's been teaching dance for over 16 years and just what that put your body through, I was noticing that there were some aches and pains that weren't going away, and that there were things that I needed to figure out how to not just survive my profession, but be able to kind of enrich not only my experience, but help educate dancers as well. And we're starting to become into that movement in the dance world, and then also in various other disciplines of somatic practices or even yoga, where we're trying to be more mindful about how we use our body. I talk a lot about it's not where you need to be, it's
Mhm.
how you get there is what's important.
Today's podcast is brought to you by the Premium Center for Regenerative Medicine and Stem Cell Therapy in the Northwest, Northwest Center for Regenerative Medicine. Get back to the activities that you love without needing surgery. You can book your appointment at nwc4rm.com. Again, that's nwc4rm.com. This podcast is also brought to you by Rare Wellness Supplements. You can head over to rareplanthealth.com to get your supplements. My personal favorite is the premium fish oil filled with omega-3s. Again, you can go to rareplanthealth.com and get the supplements that you most need to support your health and wellness today. Lastly, this podcast is also brought to you by Rare Wellness. Rare Wellness is located on the South Hill in Spokane and is one center that provides all the wellness tools that you could need. Whether you're looking for a hands-on premium intimate yoga studio with a therapeutic emphasis, bar classes, tai chi classes, if you're looking for skincare treatments, injectable, hydrofacial, microneedling, organic spa treatments, if you're wanting to get therapeutic massaged or book functional medicine appointments to get down to the root cause of your inflammation, Rare Wellness is the place for you. Whatever your wellness needs are, they have it covered. So to book your appointment today, go to rarewellness.com. Again, go to rarewellness.com and mention this podcast for 10% off when you're booking. Okay, time to get back to the episode. Man, that's so good. And so I grew up, I danced for a couple of years, but my specialty was rhythmic gymnastic. And again, a lot of that very European style of training. And I think I can definitely resonate a lot with your story because I there was movement was therapeutic, but there was a lot of ways in which it damaged my body, and I went against listening to my body rather than working with it and like building into that intuition and many things that I'm paying for already. And I feel like I'm like, I am way too young to be having the back pain that I'm having. No,
Right?
but it's so true. I think a lot of times, especially I love what you're talking about within those dance communities, within some of those sports, being able to bring in some of that somatic practice
Mm-hmm.
could really be. I wish that was something I had as a kid growing up
Mm-hmm.
in my dance classes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the education of anatomy and movement mechanics is kind of a new concept within a lot of various disciplines in dance, in gymnastics, even in sports. I mean, what coach is trained in anatomy and physiology? Maybe some, not many, right? Or what dance teacher is trained in that? And so, what I'm trying to do is get these dancers, and even when I'm teaching in my yoga class, talking about the various anatomical positions in the body that they're using while moving, that just helps you use your brain to find that imagery so that you can
Visualize it.
neurologically repattern things the way it's meant to be.
Wow. How did starting yoga and learning about some somatic practices and movement and all of that, how did that impact your life as you built your practice?
Yeah. So, as you described at the beginning, the various somatic practices that I have been training in and teaching in, and really found kind of a love for this mind body connection, because yoga is considered a somatic practice, just like Tai Chi or things like Laban Movement Analysis or various therapies. This is about reconnecting that relationship between your cognitive presence and your physical presence. And within that, I think somatic practices blends in that spiritual presence. However, you see spirituality, however, you see your kind of higher self or divine or creator, however that looks for you. Even, you feel one with nature, right? There,
Mhm.
that is a um, untouchable, unseen kind of component to who we are as human beings. And that's where I believe somatic practices are really um, bringing in kind of that woven understanding of how we can become whole people. And so that's where yoga, especially as I was starting to find that my body was breaking down and it needed something to counter all of the excessive rotations or excessive range of motion uses in dance. Now, we've all seen those yoga pictures of people doing random weird things with their legs over their head and like,
Mhm.
ooh, snapshot, right?
Mhm.
That's the yoga, but it's not really yoga, right? It's yoga
Right.
is about that discipline within stillness, that discipline within being present, whether you are lying on your mat, whether you're sitting on your tushy, whether you are standing in a warrior pose and just breathing. There is something that happens when you begin to find that stillness within a posture, whatever it looks like, that allows your nervous system to begin to repattern, reorganize, and find this kind of state of calmness within the chaos.
So good. I One thing that you talked about was this integration of like
Mhm.
mind, body, soul, spirit. And I think that alone is just so powerful because we live in a world where those things are very integrated. There's so many people who are just so disconnected from their body, so stuck in a cerebral state or constantly on our phones or constantly that we don't physically occupy the bodies that we live in. And of course, that will have effects on your mental health, your physical health, your spiritual health. And so I love that concept of using somatic practices, using yoga, using dance, using some of the techniques that we briefly mentioned earlier to just integrate your mind and your body and connect those two because truly we live in a world that is disconnected and it's really
Hmm.
sad.
Hmm.
Yeah.
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 And in the dance world of somatic practices, all of those various disciplines were created because there was a problem, and it was a problem that originated out of an individual. Some of it was someone was in a car accident, or someone was dealing with inability to speak correctly, and he went back and kind of said, okay, there's something wrong when I talk. And this was Alexander, and he was trying to figure out different ways of just like talking or speaking, and went to speech therapists and all that. And finally, he went back and realized it was how he was using his body while just talking. And so, singers and violinists and dancers and theater artists, all of them use these various techniques because of how when your body's aligned, it can function how it's been designed to be. And that's the same with yoga. And that's the same with all various somatic practices, is that yoga is about realigning and kind of folding in all of these components of who we are so that we can function at the most optimal level.
I know we have so much to talk about today, but we're gonna have to do a whole nother episode, maybe just like zoning in on one of these techniques because I think they would be extremely interesting for myself, for people listening,
Yeah.
and just another tool in the toolbox. So, how has movement impacted healing, restoration, and confidence into who we were purposed to be? Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I really started dedicating myself towards a regular practice about 10 years ago, where I joined a studio. I started training under various people, taking classes in all styles, whether it was Bikram, whether it was your normal vinyasa or power, or even your yin. And what I noticed by dedicating time to improving my physical needs, right? So I was dealing with pain. I was dealing with needing to counter the effects of my profession as a dancer. But what resulted, and it was very fascinating as you begin to cultivate this community within those who you also practice with, you begin to find that your life somewhat falls apart to then be put back together.
Yes.
And I found that by training myself to find that stillness, to find that meditation, that mindfulness that comes with being in a regular yoga practice, that I started to recognize things in my life that weren't healthy, whether they were relationships, whether they were various jobs I was doing, whether they were habits I had, all of those things. You begin to reevaluate yourself in a way that you don't normally do. And it encourages this introspection, right? Going inside. And that's so hard for us these days, right? We're so projected out, 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 or just absorbing random stuff in.
Yes.
Yoga makes it quiet enough so that you actually have the capability to go in and to go deeper into those places you don't maybe not want to find out, or to don't even know that are there, but you're curious once you step into that practice.
I love what you said about taking time to look inward and see what intuitive wisdom our body has to offer us.
Hmm.
I think our body holds ancient wisdom and it will literally speak to us what we need. And so often we're looking for, I mean, whether it's TikTok or Instagram or Google or ChatGPT or our friends or our family, or we're always looking outward for advice from other people when in reality, if we're able to carve that time and space to connect back to ourselves, a lot of times the answer is sitting right there for us, but we're so busy numbing, and we're in a world that makes it so easy to constantly, I'm so guilty of this myself, but constantly be filling with noise and outward talk, that the answer is right there. You know
Yeah.
intuitively what you need. Your body will tell you what you need to cut out, what you need to add. And I think it's better, like being in tune with your body is the greatest doctor, that greatest healer that you can have, because
Yeah.
nobody else knows what exactly you need, but your body will speak to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love that. And then the second thing I wanted to hit on was um, for neurodivergent people, sometimes making time for stillness can be very, very difficult. And I've found that yoga and movement, and I know for a lot of neurodivergence, having yoga create space for stillness without needing to be able to sit down for 10 minutes and just
Right.
immediately get into that still mode, because it can be hard, and maybe not even for neurodivergence, but just for people in general, getting into stillness can be hard. So I love all of that.
Yeah, I loved how you talked about this physicality of being present in your body. And I talk a lot about with various yoga clients or even dancers who are wanting to dive deeper into understanding who they are as artists. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's a whole nother pillar of
Yeah.
being mindful as a human being, is that I love to watch those performers who know how to move from their soul. They might not be the best technician, but man, compared to someone out there who does everything perfect but hasn't figured out how to live and move and express from their soul, I'd much rather watch that person. And, that's just kind of a test for even just the normal person. When you go and watch something, a performance, notice who you're wanting to watch, and in comparison, is that the most perfect person? Probably not, because there's something really powerful in people who have figured out how to dig deep, and go into the muck and go into the dirty and go into that kind of alter ego. It's part of you that we ignore a lot, and there's a part, but it's still a part of you. So it's
Mm-hmm.
understanding so that you can then filter accordingly. And also just this understanding that our physical body is like the first level of understanding who we are. This is what
So
like
good.
anchors us. The physicality anchors us into our first platform of understanding. Then we go into kind of that emotional and psychological. Then we go into the more spiritual and ethereal or energetic, right?
Mm-hmm.
But everything that you have right here and now is a tangible understanding of everything out there of who you are, right? So this tells you a lot.
Karla, you need your own podcast. This is so good. No, seriously, I feel like, oh my word, this is so empowering, man. And I think for people listening, you might not be a dancer. You might not feel like you're an artist, but I truly believe like life is your art. How do you move? How do you like, you can even tell, I think you can, while you were speaking, I was like, it 100% translates to artist, it 100% translates to dancer, but just in life, if you observe people living, you can see when someone is aligned with their soul and
Mm.
is fully expressive and like living in line with their truth, in line with their most authentic self. And it's just like, can when you can make time to connect with yourself when your movement, it radiates, and
Right.
that has rippling effects on the rest of your life. Yeah.
Well, I think the most tangible thing for most people is this understanding of how music moves us. That when you hear a certain song that makes your body tingle, right? There's something in the resonation of whether it's the frequency, whether it's the key, whether it's the words, whether it's the topic that you're connecting with, right? There is a emotion that happens that then stirs the emotion, and so it's this experience of being human is constantly carving out the colors on your own canvas,
Mm,
that you are creating your own picture, your own journey, your own thread, your own tapestry,
so
and that
beautiful.
alone right there is beautiful art. Um, and and I think that's why we resonate with things like just music. And I think everyone can relate to that, as there's something that stirs in your soul that creates.
Everything you're saying, I think, as well adds a layer of purpose and magic and meaning and joy to life.
Mhm.
Because I think if you don't adopt this mentality, if you don't start to see the art in life, if you don't start to what where is the joy in living without that deeper spark, with it, without that deeper meaning?
Well, you could even, going off of what you just said, if our Western world, how kind of we began here in the United States, started from this need to create order out of a different order. And I'm not going to go into the history and the religion and all that. But if you look at different countries and how they express emotion, most of the time they dance, right? So if you are down in South Africa, if you are down in Mexico, or if you're in Brazil, and they move to express their emotions, they move to express their experiences, their joys, their sadness. And I
So
think
good.
for anyone, the first thing you could do in your living room or by yourself, lock yourself in a closet, is just begin to move and see what that does to your body, right? You could even
So
just start
good.
with like squeezing your hands or like tapping your shoulder, right? Like
Mhm.
you're moving. It doesn't, it,
There's
if
no right
you're
answer.
moving, you're dancing in your own category. Like that to me is, everyone's made to dance. Not everyone's made to be a performer, right? And
I
so
love
it's
that. Yeah.
figure that out and figure out how moving your body makes you feel, and then listen to what comes to the surface. And that to me is where yoga and dance really collide, is that when you are in the space of practicing yoga and any other somatic movement, that when you begin to use your body, there's things that lift up to the surface. You're beginning to open that gateway to understanding. And that's when you begin to find that joy in understanding who you are: the beautiful, the ugly, the resilient, the curious, the funny, the sad, all that.
Carla, I feel like the other really powerful thing about what you're sharing is it's giving people permission to do things that maybe they were told after they were kids they weren't allowed to do.
Yeah.
Because I know even for myself, like growing up, I would dance all the time. Of course, part of
Mm-hmm.
it had to do with the fact that that was a huge sport in my life, but it didn't matter. I would be at home. I would always be playing music, always be just moving, expressing. And then you get older and that stops being normal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sad because what I'm hearing you say is it doesn't really like this is like I think it's also beautiful to almost to rethink even what is considered a spiritual practice, right? Because like we always think like, well, um like I think we put a lot of things in a box. Like, well, spiritual practices are prayer, reading scripture, whatever it is that it is for you, but like dance, like is that not like so beautiful of a way, like you were saying, to carve out space and time to just like express what it is that's inside of you, then take a moment to reflect afterwards, like so beautiful. And then talking about yoga and how that goes into it, but it's just that is such a beautiful concept. And for everyone listening, it doesn't matter if you're 62 or you're 12 years old, like practical challenge right here, try it. I'm
Try
gonna
it.
try it later,
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
exactly.
beautiful.
I mean, there's groups all over the world that get together just to dance, and it's they just put on music and they just start bopping around in a space. Nothing is organized. Nothing is specific social dancing. It's just to move and explore as this human organism, and how you relate to one another, because we do have this energetic connection to one another. And I know that sounds woo woo, but go to, I mean, I'm gonna go super weird and sciency on you, but when you look at mindfulness and meditation, and this was something in my doctoral program that we were studying, is that when you look at like Newtonian versus quantum physics, right? So quantum physics, when you see two items in space, there's actually this energetic pull between them, and they affect one another, right? And so when Newtonian physics and quantum kind of moved towards quantum physics, we saw how these two items within it could be long distance or short distance, right?
Mhm.
How their energy began to affect one another.
Yes.
And that's the same with human beings. We all have a specific energy that we come with, and that there's going to be ebbs and flows, right? And how I behave energetically, whether it's conscious or not, is going to affect you not energetically, whether it's conscious or not. And so that's also a part of movement and somatic and dance and yoga. I even have a story about that, if you're open to that, where yoga can really reveal a deeper understanding of what's your energy and what's someone else's energy, because that's where I think we get overwhelmed and confused these days, is that there's all this emotion and energy and stuff going on, and things are whirling around so fast, whether it's, electronics or just life, right? That sometimes we don't have the skill to decipher what's mine and what's someone else's. And how do we begin to just healthfully compartmentalize ourselves so that we can stay healthier human beings?
So good. No, and it's that awareness that, like you were saying, there's tools like yoga and all of the
Mhm.
other things that we talked about that can help you do. Let's hear this story. Also, I
Yeah.
want to I want to touch on, I don't think this is woo-woo at all. I think it's just
Yeah.
stuff that maybe has been misinterpreted, or is what's the word? Just myths and misunderstandings from people, that really, that there is science that backs it, and it's not
Mhm.
like everything you just described. Like, that's not really a question. It's
Right.
the study of quantum physics, and then how do we apply it in our
Yeah.
lives, which is so beautiful.
Well, and really quick, even think about everything on this planet and in the universe exists at a certain frequency. So each organ you have exists at a certain frequency, a cup exists at a certain frequency. Everything has an ideal frequency through which it vibrates, right? So they find that when an organ or tissue resonates at a lower frequency than it's been designed to resonate
Mhm.
at, it's unhealthy, and it begins to find inflammation or deterioration or disease or things like that. And so that's why this whole movement of listening to beta or theta waves or delta waves, right, is about recalibrating our frequencies as human beings and as living organisms, is trying to even heal it on that um, energetic level, right?
So good.
Yeah, it's just, to me, it's just fascinating, and I could just geek out on it forever. But
So good. So good. We're gonna have to, Carla, we're gonna have to schedule like a million episodes to go over everything in depth. So yeah, let's
so my
wow.
story. So my
Let's go to the
story.
story.
So when this was a really revealing moment in my practice as a yogi, is I remember I was going into a class. I was really excited to take yoga. My body felt good. I was like ready to just rock and roll, and got on my mat and took class and all that. And like halfway through class, I was like, oh my gosh, I can barely like hold my head up right now. What just happened? Like I felt just heavy and exhausted, and it was really strange. It didn't match to kind of how I was thinking I was supposed to be kind of behaving, and all that can be various different elements and things like that. But what was interesting is that when I was in my shavasana, or my ending pose, I could quietly hear someone behind me crying, and I thought, it was you. And I was like, it was so illuminating to how powerful um, our emotions are, and that I was having a hard time understanding the emotion that was surrounding me in that space. And once I understood it, it was like almost like, oh, okay, all right, this isn't mine, this is yours. Um, and that there was a tender understanding of knowing that I've been in that position many times on my mat, where I just all of a sudden start crying. Thank God for hot yoga, because you're sweating tears anyway. So,
Oh,
right,
same. Absolutely.
right,
There's so many times in Shavasana I'm like, what am I crying about right now? And then I'm
yeah,
like, wow, this was a memory that came up from so long ago. It's so interesting how your body
Yeah,
does that. It keeps score.
yeah.
Yeah.
It does. It does. And it was just a really good example for me, a reminder that we are living, breathing human beings that come with so much history and baggage and experiences and lenses and biases and all that that comes with being in the same room with someone other. So when you're sifting through all that through the practice of yoga, there's going to be moments where you're going to have to build that intelligence internally about how do you understand what's yours, what's meant for you in that space, and what's someone else's, and be okay with just letting it roll off.
And how do you keep that boundary? Because I think something that is difficult, especially for people pleasers or maybe empaths, is like,
Hmm.
how do I honor what someone else is experiencing without picking it up and being
Hmm.
able to set that boundary and be like, I don't have to actually carry this as my own.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
that's
difficult.
hard,
It
right?
is, yeah.
And I think the word empath gets such a bad rap, right? But I was actually thinking about that earlier today, and how an empath is just someone who is able to feel and recognize what's already there more than someone else,
Mm.
right?
Which is actually
So
beautiful. Yeah.
yeah, it really is. So it's just a skill. It's a
Yeah.
gift, just like someone else is really skilled at, skiing on a mountain and someone's really skilled at dancing. Someone can be very skilled at noticing emotions and energy of other people, right? And just bringing it down to that basic level of that is a skill and that's a gift for specific people. And I think that's also something you can develop. I think it's not necessarily only, held by a select
And
few.
hopefully you should
Yeah.
develop emotional
Yeah.
intelligence as you
Right.
continue. Right. No, absolutely. So
Yeah.
good. So good.
Yeah. So I think, especially in the practice of yoga, there will be those times of confusion when you first begin. But that's truly where if you have a teacher or a mentor who is there kind of holding a safe space for their clients and their practitioners to be in that vulnerable place, that's where you can kind of rest in knowing that it's okay to be a little confused for a while as you develop
So
your
good.
own practice.
Man, I love that yoga and everything that you're sharing holds space for that. Of
Mhm.
the point is not to come and I don't remember who it was. I think it was one of the many teachers that I practiced with over time. It's like there's nothing to arrive to. Like you're just here to experience it. So it's like because I think when I first started just journeying inward overall, I was like, I need to fix things. I need to sort and fix through all the pieces of me. And then I think my real healing started when I realized there's nothing to fix. There's just pieces to experience and embrace and like explore. But it's like what are we arriving to? Where are we going?
Right.
Like,
Right.
yeah, and it's
Yeah.
liberating. It's liberating when yeah, so coming back to yoga and somatics,
Mhm.
how do yoga and somatics help make the more intangible aspects of life experiences more tangible?
Yeah. So somatic practice is about this process of connecting the mind and the body, right?
Yeah,
So a lot of our experiences sometimes are really hard to cognitively process, right? Whether it's a really wonderful thing in life, whether it's a really hard thing in life, whether it's things you don't even quite understand that you're experiencing. So our brains sometimes just have so much space to just sift through and make sense of. So that's where bringing in the body to kind of bypass our need to control our understanding comes into play. And that's what I love about somatic practices is that move the body first, then the understanding will come. I worked with, yeah, right.
that's so. I feel like that needs to be like quoted. Wow, that is so good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've done a lot of workshops with domestic violence victims, with human trafficking victims, with even caretakers of people who deal with those with various disabilities, and just even the trauma of caring for someone who's dealing with a lot in life, or the trauma of experiencing domestic violence or human trafficking, that a lot of times these people aren't ready to talk, but they need to deal with and process through. Like, that's just essential for healing. If they don't, they're going to find themselves dealing with a lot more complication, right? Or even going back to that situation, which no one wants. So how do you
Which,
help them? Go
sorry,
ahead.
sorry to interrupt really quickly, but I'm gonna forget this thought. It's that, a lot of those diseases end up showing up in your body if you don't move through them with your body. So like PCOS, I mean, obviously like we're talking about totally different stuff, but it can show up as PCOS. It can show up as gut issues. It can show up as hormonal acne. It can show up as literal immune diseases. Like there's, anyway, so much. And we've briefly touched on this in different stuff, but it's just like dance movement. Like it's not just like, oh, that's like a fun, silly thing you do. Like that is an integral part of moving through some of these super traumatic things that, and everyone experiences them on a different level in life. So anyway, keep going with
Yes.
the
Yeah. No,
absolutely.
I want to go back to that because
Yeah.
there's a conversation with that as well. So don't forget
So
that.
good. Yeah.
But working with in this workshop, and I was actually specifically using Laban Movement Analysis, which has these what are called 8 effort actions, and they're broken down into concepts like literally the action of punching. It could be a fist, or it could be an elbow, or it could be a foot, a ringing, a float, like these words that bring on various sensations in your body. And it's kind of easy to articulate no matter how much dance experience you've had. And by working with these individuals who have dealt with traumatic experiences, they first understood what those effort actions felt like in their body, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then we went further and we decided as an individual which words really stuck out to us, right? So some days the word ring, twisting,
Mm-hmm.
really like something was ignited inside of me, along with the word like dab, right? Or slash. And so these are part of that category of the 8 effort actions.
Love it.
And then it's that conversation of, okay, why did those words feel good to you, right? What
So
does
good.
ring bring on to you? It's that tension. It might feel kind of ugly. It might feel conflicting, or float. You feel light and effortless. And then it's like, okay, what emotions come with that, or what experiences come to mind when you're thinking through that? And so it's almost like this, slowly but surely we begin to make our way towards this understanding of an experience. And then it's almost like the doors of communication are just kind of fizzled,
Yeah.
and people are willing and open to talk. There are people who step into those workshops and those spaces like arms crossed, and they're just
Mm-hmm.
looking at you like, you want me to what? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And at the end, they're literally telling their whole life story, right? It doesn't always happen
Moving.
that way, but it's
No.
just that power of how movement can really heal.
Today's podcast is brought to you by the Premium Center for Regenerative Medicine and Stem Cell Therapy in the Northwest, Northwest Center for Regenerative Medicine. Get back to the activities that you love without needing surgery. You can book your appointment at nwc4rm.com. Again, that's nwc4rm.com. This podcast is also brought to you by Rare Wellness Supplements. You can head over to rareplanethealth.com to get your supplements. My personal favorite is the premium fish oil filled with omega-3s. Again, you can go to rareplanethealth.com and get the supplements that you most need to support your health and wellness today. Lastly, this podcast is also brought to you by Rare Wellness. Rare Wellness is located on the South Hill in Spokane and is one center that provides all the wellness tools that you could need. Whether you're looking for a hands-on premium intimate yoga studio with a therapeutic emphasis, bar classes, Tai Chi classes, if you're looking for skincare treatments, injectable, hydrofacial, microneedling, organic spa treatments, if you're wanting to get therapeutic massage or book functional medicine appointments to get down to the root cause of your inflammation, Rare Wellness is the place for you. Whatever your wellness needs are, they have it covered. So to book your appointment today, go to rarewellness.com. Again, go to rarewellness.com and mention this podcast for 10% off when you're booking. Okay, time to get back to the episode. using your body to access your mind. And I know a lot of times when your mind is closed off or you're afraid of accessing those emotions, sometimes it is way too intimidating to sit down and face those head on. And sometimes you don't even know where to start. You've shut down your communication with yourself for so long, you don't even know where to start in addressing your own thoughts. So that is such a powerful thing. I'm sure that those have all been really deep experiences getting
Yeah.
to do that with all sorts of people and even with yourself. So
Mhm.
that's powerful, Karla.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been special experiences throughout my career.
Yeah.
You talked about how your body holds things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are times when we're dealing with a various pose in yoga and talking through when you're holding a pose that's dealing with opening your hips or your shoulders or things like that. And, you know, our body creates this chemical response to what we experience in life. It could be like having a baby, it's amazing, or it could be I was in a car accident, or it was I got married, or I mean spectrums, right? It can be wonderful things, it can be really hard things. Your body has to naturally amp up, right, this adrenaline and drive your cortisol up. Like that's a biological response to something exciting or stimulating in your life, right? The problem is that we don't take the time to allow ourselves, yeah, to
To like rebalance it.
rebalance. And it's not even necessarily detox, it's just that margin for our bodies and our minds to kind of sift through all of that. And so usually we go from one experience to another, right? And so there's no space for that recovery and that restoration and that time of being mindful in the moment, right? So then where does all those chemicals go? They love your deep fascial tissue, right? So they're going to find a home in the most dense places in your body. And then that's where we find, like in our hips and our shoulders, and where there's lots of deep fascia. So it's that white stringy stuff you see in between muscles, right? And that's where it's easy for those chemicals to find a home and get stuck. And then what happens is once something balls up, all of a sudden you have a knot in that area, and then it causes it causes that obstacle between your muscles sliding and moving accordingly. So then you feel pain or restriction of movement, right? Stays there long enough, that pain and restriction of movement is going to create more and more inflammation. Inflammation leads its way towards illness and sickness, which then leads to disease and deterioration. So it's,
Karla,
yeah.
you are putting science in words to experiences and observations that I've never been able to articulate. And I am literally mind blown. That, wow. No, and beyond that, shameless plug, honestly, this is why having a yoga membership, having a yoga
Mhm.
practice, having weekly or monthly or whatever is accessible in your life of massages and movement and
Mhm.
like it's not a luxury, it's a
Mhm.
necessity, right? Because it's like, anyway, that is, I'm gonna need 3 to 5 business days to process everything that we're gonna talk about today. I feel like I'm gonna go, and I really want to touch on what you said about constantly moving. We move. I mean, I'm this is me in a nutshell, but like constantly moving from thing to thing to thing, and you don't end up processing it. And where does it go? And so it's like carving out time and space for it. Um, I am realizing just talking to the importance of that. And I'm sure many of our listeners can all relate, especially in the world that we live in. I mean, I think in a sense, maybe COVID and that time period helped us slow down a little bit. But for many, many, many Americans and beyond, our culture is go as hard as you can, go as fast as you can, take as
Mhm.
little breaks as possible, and don't
Yeah.
stop. And that's
Right.
just like hearing that again, it's not a luxury to make time to connect back to yourself. It's a necessity. Yeah.
Exactly. You need, I mean, you've got to turn your phone off every so often because stops working correctly, right? And all of a sudden you restart and it's like, oh my goodness, everything works fine, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing with the human experience, that you need to put time in between all of those experiences in life. Think about back in the day when, horse and buggy, right? There was so much time in between the various interactions between human beings and experiences in life where they had that natural space to recalibrate, to process, to kind of work through things. And so we've just we have shortened that distance so much that no longer are we able to humanly function correctly.
Wow.
And we've been trained to think that there's something wrong with us if we need to do that. And that's just, I mean, if we can learn anything, is that we have to do that. Or on the flip side, you're going to spend just as much money, if not more, on other things because you're now sick and have disease and things like that. It doesn't mean that we don't live in an imperfect world, and you could live your life perfectly and you could still, deal with things. I mean, it's like cancer doesn't discriminate. It could choose whoever and whatever. But we can do our best to create the most homeostasis or holistic environment for us to survive in, so that when we
Yeah.
do run into those big bumps in life, we are more equipped to not waver as much, right? It won't
So
take us
good.
down so far that we might not be able to come back.
So good. So, Karla, you mentioned earlier that you're in your doctorate at the moment.
Mhm.
Um, what are you studying in your dissertation process? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the program I'm at is at Gonzaga University. It's under the leadership development department there, and it is such a cool program because there are people from Zimbabwe, from all over the world that I get to meet and interact with. And everyone who's in that program are wanting to develop themselves as leaders and mentors in their specific field. So for me, I really appreciated how this program encourages you to, one, dive deeper into who you are as an individual and figure out what your strengths and weaknesses are, because unless you do that, you can't foster an environment for other people to grow and mature and become their own leaders. And it's changing that mind frame. It's any profession that you're in, anything that you do, you begin to develop a process of mastery. And then from there, there's this natural progression of mentoring someone else. Voila, you're a leader, right? So it's, how do you begin to eliminate this need to manage people, and how do you begin to guide and lead them? So um, that's where my various degrees leading up to this, and my various passions of looking into spirituality and this idea of being holistic and somatic practices, and how I've fallen in love with how yoga is so complementary to my way of life, and then other people who have had similar stories coming from totally different
Walks of
places in
life.
life,
Yeah.
walks in life and professions, right? But what I'm seeing is that there is this need for this tapestry of being alive as a human being to kind of reconnect these threads. And that, I think COVID really kind of illuminated
Yeah.
that problem there, right? Doesn't matter how you think politically or all that. There is something broken in our world, right?
100%.
So for me, I find that movement inspires me to be a better person. And I found that works for a lot of people, not everyone. And I get that. But I want to dive deeper into, okay, how do we begin to quantify this understanding of how people begin to change when they experience life through their bodies, and through this form of, like, how does our body become art, but then how do we talk about things through our bodies as art, right? So it's kind of, it's a conduit, it's this funnel of understanding that I'm going to be looking at, and like how not only is it going to be healing myself, and you found ways of healing, but then how do you allow that to then tentacle out and become a source of healing for others? How that looks, we'll find out, right? But I think we inherently have this desire to want to know thyself, right? How that works is, I think, the question. How that happens is the question, and everyone's going to find ways that works best for them. But I believe movement is universal, right? Even the planets are
Yes.
moving, cells are
Yes.
moving. So how do we tap into that universality of understanding for all human beings?
So good. I'm really excited to just continue talking to you as you continue to discover exactly what, and it's, I've had this conversation with so many friends, professionals, etc. But this question, how do you know yourself? Everyone's like, no, figure out who
Mm-hmm.
you are, discover yourself. But
Mm-hmm.
barely anyone has an answer on how to do that. Right? So it's like, it's this, everyone says the answer is know yourself, figure out who you are. And when you ask them how, they're like,
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
everyone just like doesn't answer the question. So I think the fact that you're going to be taking on this giant of answering the question of how does one know thyself, and then how does that impact their communities is just really exciting, really impactful. I also wanted to touch on, you mentioned earlier, since we are talking about yoga and somatic movement today, earlier when you talked about how people from many different walks of life have been able to find healing in yoga. And so this is a misconception that I think is out there, frankly, too often. But I think yoga is a vehicle just as much, it's a tool just as much as. So, for example, no one ever would take prayer and be like, prayer is exclusively for only Christians or Muslims or Hindus, right? Like prayer is a practice that you can do across backgrounds, religions, worldviews, wherever you come from. Like everyone can pray and do it without compromising their religious beliefs, right? I really see yoga as a vehicle in the same way, where yoga is a vehicle just as movement, just as somatic practices, just as prayer, just as journaling, right? It is a tool
Mm-hmm.
that you can take, and regardless of what path of life you come from, you can
Mm-hmm.
find unique healing in it for you. So
Oh boy, that's a biggie right now. I feel like that's a big hangup of yoga for people,
mhm,
especially coming from various religious perspectives. And
mhm.
that's a whole nother
I
podcast
know
in itself,
this is the
right?
podcast, and I know it's a like it is a can of
Yeah,
worms to
it
unlock.
is. And
I'm
oh
just
man,
giving my
I would
opinion.
love to talk about that more. Uh, because I've had to go through that myself as
Mhm.
coming from a Judeo-Christian upbringing, and then also understanding that yoga has been developed um, underneath this Hindu and Buddhist tradition. Um, but my answer to that is that everyone here on earth is here for a reason.
Mhm.
Everyone here on earth is designed to do something beautiful and specific. It doesn't fit in my categorical box of what I think something should be, not always, but I think it really depends on how you use whatever you use. Like, what's the source of why you're doing yoga, why you're doing music, why you're whatever, all these various things, is that we are designed to learn and interact with people who are different from us. If we
Absolutely.
all looked like me, if we all looked like you or whoever, it would be really boring,
What a boring
right?
world. Yeah.
No one
Oh.
wants that, right? When we really think about it, no one wants that. But I can sure learn from the experiences you've had, Nat, and I can appreciate them, and I can see how they can begin to move my soul, and how can I use parts of your story to begin to inform my journey, right? Um, and that's where I think yoga has been really a helpful tool in me, is that I respect the tradition that it comes from.
And
I need
honoring the
to
lineage.
honor
You
the
cannot take
lineage.
out honoring where it came from and being able to
Exactly.
respect that. And so, yes,
You
100%.
have to know, you have to respect something, you have to understand it, right?
So many
So,
quotes, Carla. So many quotes. That's so good. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So just because I understand something and respect it doesn't mean that it's become my my religious tenet, right?
Right.
And I'm okay with compartmentalizing that because that makes sense to me. And there are parts of this lineage that ring true in my soul, that makes sense to me, that makes sense to some of those intangible parts of how I live life, and that have helped me become a whole person in the journey I'm on, right? And I think we're doing a disservice to ourselves by eliminating so many things in our lives because it doesn't fit into that specific box. And those are good
There's
questions for us to ask.
Yeah, no, and there's so much wisdom in what you're saying, and also to I feel like that challenges my statement a little bit, but in the best way possible, um because I agree. That is a very good perspective. And honestly, I feel like that is not a heated, but a very debated question that would be really interesting to just talk about sometime. There's so much that we should dive into. But
Yeah.
Karla, before we wrap up this episode, if today's listeners, I know that if they're anything like me, they got so much out of this, so much. But if after today they only applied one thing to their life, from everything we've talked about, what would that practical tip be, that challenge for our listeners this week?
Oh my gosh, Nat, that's just hard. Right. Oh, my initial answer is that there is something deep inside of you that wants to express itself. And the first way to maybe try to do that is just to move your body and see what happens.
That's, it's so simple and it's yet so hard and so
Right.
good. And guys, again, doesn't matter if you're 62, doesn't matter if you're 12, try it. I'm going to
Yeah.
try it this week. Yeah, it's so, so, so good. Karla, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I know there is so much more. We could probably talk for hours on this. I feel like you have so much wisdom, so
Mm,
much wisdom, and you have such a special offering through your
thank you.
expertise that is very unique. And I'm excited for you. I'm excited for your PhD journey. I'm excited to have you back on if you're willing to come back on and
Definitely.
tell us more.
Anytime. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we could come up with like 50 different topics to talk about just from what we covered today. And I know that you have so much more wisdom and knowledge to share. So again, thank you so much. And to all of our listeners, be sure to send in your questions. If anything today sparked an idea or a question that you have for Karla or anyone else, send them in. Find us on Instagram at Room on This Podcast and send us your questions. Nothing is off topic. Everything will stay anonymous on the podcast. So don't worry about that. And yeah, send them in so that we can ask the experts your questions. Karla, thank you so much for being on today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Nat.
Yeah. Tune in next week. See you guys on Friday. Bye, guys.